Thank you very much for to the organizer for the invitation, especially because I'm not really originally from this domain of research. What I mean by domain of research is probability. I'm more an analyst and a geometer, and I'm doing a bit of mathematical physics, but I try to learn probability at my speed, let's say, by working with Vincent, Rémi, and Assuranti. So I'm going to continue the talk of Vincent somehow and explain some results we just finished and we posted maybe 3 weeks ago on the archive. It's a long paper, but the introduction we hope is understandable, and I think we'll try to write maybe a survey article about everything that makes it a bit more accessible, at least from outside, if you want to understand a bit what's going on. I think it's a beautiful theory, which was developed by physicists, this Liouville conformal field theory, and in general, conformal field theory. It's quite amazing that now one get expression of the partition function and correlation function in terms of expectation of random variable, especially the multiplicative chaos. And what is more, even more incredible is that you can actually get formula for all these integrals over all surfaces by this recursive approach developed by the physicists. So in what we do, we take some idea of what the physicists have developed since 40 years, and we try to make things rigorous. And for this, the probabilistic tool is very important. It's a key. But there's also an analytic tool, which is all this analysis of the Hamiltonian, which has been very important in our approach. And I think it's really this combination of several tools which make things possible in some sense. And I'll try to explain this. So I'll try with very elementary things just to motivate and explain a bit what I understand is quantum field theory. So I start with classical mechanics, let's say in dimension 2 because we work on surfaces. So for classical mechanics, you have a space of dimension 2, a surface, like the sphere, for instance, or the plane, the torus. I denote the point by x. Then in classical mechanics, you have point and velocity. So xi is the speed, or the impulsion. It lives in the space, the surface, time R2. R2 is the velocity. So you have a point x and then a tangent vector v, which live in a two-dimensional plane, which is tangent at x. So if you want to really work in terms of manifold, this should be the tangent bundle, or actually cotangent bundle. The observable in classical mechanics, they are function on the phase space, this base space time R2. And an example is typically what we call Hamiltonian, which is the energy. And for instance, I took this example of the kinetic energy and the potential energy. So it's xi squared is the kinetic energy, Vx is the potential energy, where V is the potential, let's say a smooth potential over the sphere, for instance. And then when you have an Hamiltonian like this, you have a Hamilton equation. So you take xt is x1t, x2t, or you have two dimension, two variable. Xt is the impulsion, the speed. So xc should be related to x. And the movement, the way the particle and the velocity move are given by this equation. It's called the Hamilton equation. It's a very simple ODE system with initial condition. And you can see that it gives you a flow. So the solution at time t move according to the flow of a vector field. And it's a vector field of position and impulsion. Okay? So this is classical mechanics. Now what is quantum mechanics in dimension 2? Of course it's very, it's like very kind of small summary, but now you still take your phase space, you still have points and velocity, but now you don't want to think of x as a point, but more as a probability density of presence of the particle. And we need a Hilbert space. So the Hilbert space typically will be L2 of the of your base space of dimension 2. So here was the sphere, for instance, could be L2 of the sphere. For this, you need a measure. The points, the x, are replaced somehow by functions on M. So density, probability density. The observable, they become linear operators. So if you have a classical observable, a function on the phase space, you quantize it. So you replace it by an operator. And I denote it by op of A. So op is just the quantization procedure. There are many ways to quantize, but you choose one. And it's going to be a bounded operator from the Hilbert space to the Hilbert space on the base space. You see, it's not an operator on the phase space, but on the base space. So it's on half the dimension of the classical dynamic. And then, if I took my example of the classical Hamiltonian, which was the energy, you replace it by its quantization. And basically, you replace the xi variable by d over dx, by the differentiation, and you keep Vx as a multiplication operator. So this becomes the Schrödinger operator. And now the dynamics is given by the Schrödinger equation, which is now a PDE. I mean, or if you want, you could think of it as a sort of ODE in infinite dimension, but it's really a PDE in this case. And you have I times the time derivative of f is given by h of f with some initial condition. And you have, again, a sort of flow, which is the Schrödinger evolution. So it's exponential ITH. We denote it exponential ITH because of this equation. And you can think of it as a flow. So in the slide before, it was the flow of a vector field, which is the Hamilton vector field. And this Hamilton vector field is just given by this dxi h and dxgh. Okay. So now let me come to quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is not really mathematically completely well defined. I mean, there are many approaches for this. But I want to focus on a certain aspect that will come in this resolution of the Liouville theory. Now I want to view the surface more as a space-time. So it's one dimension of space and one dimension of time. So an example is just a cylinder. We have time like this. And the space variable, I denote it by theta. It lives on a circle, let's say, if I want to be in a compact setting at least. I denote by E of sigma. Sigma is my surface. The space of field. So a field is a generalized function on sigma. Generalized function means a distribution. In general, for quantum field theory, we have to work with distribution. And typically, it lives in some Sobolev space. So it's a space of distribution. So S is minus S is negative, so it's a singular function. And the points that we had in classical mechanics are replaced by field, which means distribution. Okay? So it's not really probability density anymore, it's a distribution. And now, so imagine this is a space-time. I evolve, a circle evolves with time. I can try to restrict my field on a circle at time t, for instance. Of course, it's a distribution, so it's not clear in general you can restrict a distribution to a submanifold. But let's forget it for the moment. If you restrict your field to all these embedded circles, which are evolution over time, you get a family of fields on this circle, which are kind of evolving with time. Okay? So this field, phi, which is it's a distribution on the circle now, each of these restrictions on the circle. You can expand them in a Fourier basis on the circle. The fact that they are in negative Sobolev space, you can interpret it as a growth of the Fourier component. It's just this condition. And now if you want to quantize, you see that the probability density become their function over this distribution on the circle with value in the real number, say. So they are function of this sequence phi minus n, phi 0, phi n, and then you continue to infinity. So they are function over an infinite dimensional space. And if you want to do quantization, it's a bit like quantum mechanics. You need the Hilbert space. And the Hilbert space, typically, you want to think of it as L2 But instead of L2 of M that we had originally in the usual quantum mechanics, we want to replace M by the space of field. So here, of course, here it's more like one-dimensional because it's S1. Because I think of a surface as a space-time in this case. So for this, we need a measure. We need a measure on the space of field, which for me will be this negative Sobolev space, this random Fourier series. This Fourier series, I mean, putting a measure is like, in some sense, giving a law on this coefficient. And this is the main difficulty, I mean, one of the main difficulties, at least in quantum field theory, is defining a measure on infinite dimensional space. As you know, it's very complicated. And this is where probability is key. It's really important. And now we have a dynamic. Dynamics is you take a functional over the space of field, so it's H minus S of the circle. You view it as an element in the Hilbert space. So Hilbert space, I remember, it's an L2 function over the space of field with respect to a certain measure. And there is an evolution, a little bit like the Schrödinger evolution, generated by some operator, but this time the operator acts on this Hilbert space, which is L2 of the space of field on the circle with respect to mu. So H, this Hamiltonian now, is an operator acting on this space. So it's an operator acting on an infinite dimensional space in the quantum field theory. The problem is, in general, it's complicated. We cannot really define a measure associated to a Lorentzian metric, so to a real space-time where you have gravity. So in general, there's a trick in physics, which is called this weak rotation, which is to rather view or to consider Euclidean quantum field theory, which is instead of putting a Lorentzian metric, like a Minkowski type metric, which in this case would be like d theta square minus dt square for the cylinder, we want to replace this this minus by a plus, so it becomes Riemannian. And then for us is a little bit better. And in this case, it turns out that this dynamic, the t becomes a real number, it is replaced by a real number, and it's more related to a probabilistic approach. And instead of having a unitary evolution like this, we get more like a Markov process. And this is the process that Vincent told you with this Brownian motion when he contracted the disk. And it's a contraction semigroup instead. A bit like, it's like a Hit operator where the H is not the Laplacian anymore, but it's an operator in infinite dimension. And this was the Hamiltonian that you saw in Vincent's talk. You remember there was the Hamiltonian, I will come to this later, but there was this Hamiltonian, which was the Laplacian on the real line. Then there was a P operator, which has a kind of harmonic oscillator in infinite dimension. It's a harmonic oscillator in each of these Fourier components. And then there was an interaction term, which was a potential. So it's like the Schrödinger operator. There is a component with C, and a functional over the function of the field. So it's a function of phi1, phi2, phi(n). There is an infinite number of them. Okay. So now let me come to Liouville theory. So the Liouville action, Vincent showed you what it was. It's this functional. So you fix a surface, imagine the sphere, put a Riemannian metric G, and you take this quantity. So here you have the Dirichlet energy, quadratic. You have a linear term. Q is a parameter, which I kept on the blackboard. This was this gamma over 2 plus 2 over gamma. It belongs to 25 to infinity. Kg is twice the Gaussian curvature of G. So for the sphere, it would be 1. It depends, of course, of G, but if you take the canonical metric, it would be 1. Kg would be 2, sorry. The Gauss curvature is 1. And then you have this interaction term, which is the exponential of this functional phi. Sorry, here it should be a big phi. It's not a var phi here, it should be a big phi. Okay, I'll keep the notation here. So we want to start with this action, d phi square G plus twice Q G phi. So this is the linear term, plus exponential gamma phi, and then I use the Riemannian measure on the surface. And I don't put there was a mu in the talk of Vincent. I assume mu is 1 because mu is kind of irrelevant somehow in the theory, as long as it's positive at least. When you have a classical action, it's natural to look at the critical point as a functional of phi. And in fact, they're related to uniformization of surface. So if you fix a background metric, you try to minimize this functional. You take all the phi, you minimize. You will find a phi 0. It turns out to be a strictly convex functional. And the curvature of this metric, you take the g, you multiply by this factor, is going to be constant. I'm cheating a little bit because for this, actually, one would need only 2 over gamma and not this gamma over 2. But let's forget this for now. So it means we're going to work on a quantum field theory which is related to the uniformization of Riemann surface, which means the expectation, the correlation function, should somehow concentrate in some sense on constant curvature surfaces. Okay, so Vincent gave you the formulas about what is Liouville formula, what is Liouville theory, field theory. There was the partition function, which I denote by the expectation of 1. So this is the physics definition, the formal definition. You integrate over the space of field. Think of it as a Sobolev space, again, negative Sobolev space. And then exponential of the Liouville action and time formal Lebesgue measure. This is not well defined at the mathematical level. Using probability, using this Gaussian multiplicative chaos, we have now an explicit formula as Vincent explained. And here, this is where the Gaussian multiplicative chaos comes, this exponential gamma xg times the volume measure. It's a random distribution. And again, as Vincent explained, the quadratic term, the Gaussian term in the measure, is represented in this expectation, which is the law of the Gaussian of the GFF, the Gaussian free field xg. And the C is just the zero. It corresponds to the constant on the function because, of course, in the quadratic term, if you take a constant, you get 0. So you have to add this Lebesgue measure, which takes care of this constant term, because the Gaussian free field is orthogonal to the constant. So it's a field with covariance given by the Green function of the Laplacian. This is the partition function. Now the correlation function is similar. You pick some point on your surface, some weight, alpha 1, alpha n. Okay, where's the eraser? So you pick some point, you put some weight on each of one. You can think of the weight as conical singularity, actually, in terms of geometry. And you put this correlation here. You correlate the field at different points with this weight alpha 1, alpha n. And in physics, they are interested to try to get formula of this. So for them, define the theories, give some numbers associated to this formal integral. But now we have a math definition, so there is something which exists. The number exists. You can even compute them numerically. You want to find an expression for this. So I don't spend too much time on this because Vincent explained. So let me explain the physics heuristic behind the Segal axiom. Segal axiom is really related to this example that Vincent showed you of a conditioning a measure. You want to compute an integral, you will put some conditioning. So take your surface like this. It's a genus 2 surface. You put a circle in the middle. You decompose your surface into two surfaces with boundary, M1 and M2. Sorry, it should be sigma 1 and sigma 2. The C is the boundary of these two circles. You have your path integral here, which now can be represented as an expectation. It's really an expectation of a random variable. The Liouville action, you see it's a local action. So if you have a surface which is a direct sum of two, it turns out that you're going to get S sigma 1 plus S sigma 2. So this is S sigma 1 of phi restricted to sigma 1 plus S sigma 2 of phi restricted to sigma 2. So to compute the action, you can decompose things because they are integrals. Okay? So you decompose this. Now you decompose your your integral over all the space of function by conditioning the value of the field on the surface on this C in the middle. This was the circle that Vincent explained when you decompose the sphere in his talk. In his talk, he said, we have to look at the Gaussian free field and restrict on this circle. We decompose the Gaussian free field in xd, xd complementary plus the harmonic extension of phi, and phi was the restriction of the Gaussian free field to the circle in the middle. So here we do the same. That's the idea of this path integral. Then we get an integral over the space of field on the circle C, which think of it as this phi here, of this integral here. It's the integral over all space of field on sigma 1 with a conditioning on C of this measure. So now it's the Liouville action on sigma 1 of phi restricted to sigma 1. Sorry, M1 should be always sigma 1. So it's a general axiom in my talk that Mi is sigma 1. Because I'm used to use M as a manifold. And then the same here. And then you get an integral over the space of field on the circle. So you see that you get a kind of scalar product over the space of field on the circle with respect to a certain distribution measure on the space of field on the circle. You see? So we call this A of sigma 1 and A of sigma 2, which are function of space of field on the circle. We get a scalar product. So we can imagine that it's a scalar product in a Hilbert space. And this is all what is Segal axiom, essentially. It's disintegration of a path integral into a path integral of a measure with conditioning on circle where you cut. Okay, now mathematically, what it is. Segal said a conformal field theory, you can define it like this. So it's a S1 is the boundary of Riemann surface with boundary. So at least, or you have several circles. Like the cylinder, you have two boundaries. So for each circle, like this one, when we cut the sphere in two, or for instance, a torus can be viewed as identifying this circle with this circle. So again, we can do it as a circle embedded in a torus. So if we want to compute a path integral on the torus, we just cut it here, put a conditioning on this. You attach to this a Hilbert space, and the Hilbert space is going to be this thing. It's going to be L2 of the space of field on the circle, which is the space negative Sobolev space H minus S. It will be given by a certain measure, which is going to be a Gaussian measure in our case. So for each circle, we attach a Hilbert space. It's a functor, actually, so it means you have a morphism. So for each surface with boundary, we need a parametrization. So we need a way to parameterize the boundary of the circle by, I don't know, for instance, S, maybe. S is a parametrization of the boundary by a canonical circle. So for each boundary, we need the parametrization. And then for each surface, we will associate what we call an amplitude, which is an element in L2 of this space of field to power B, because our surface has a B boundary. So imagine, for instance, a pair of points. We have three boundaries. We have a boundary field here, a boundary field here, and a boundary field here. So phi equal phi 1, phi 2, phi 3 is going to live in the Sobolev space H minus S of S1 to the power 3. And for this surface, sigma, equipped with symmetric, we want to associate an amplitude, what we call an amplitude. So it's a function of the three field, which is in L2 on this H minus S of S1 with respect to this measure to the power 3 in this case. So each surface, we should get an amplitude. And the amplitude should be nothing more than, this this formal integral with conditioning. So you condition the value of your field on each of the boundary. You integrate with this conditioning, you get a number, and this is your amplitude. And then it should satisfy some conformal invariance, which means that if you change your background metric by a positive function, it should be basically the same, except that it multiplied by a positive number, which is completely explicit, and involve this what Vincent called the central charge, this 1 plus 6q squared. In this case, when the central charge is this, for instance. So basically, it says that the background metric is not, as long as you have 1, if you multiply by a function, it changes in a very canonical way, and it's just deterministic. It's very simple. And the most important part of this axiom is the gluing axiom. Remember, the path integral on the whole thing should be a pairing, an L2 pairing of this amplitude of sigma 1 with the one of sigma 2. Here, this is the gluing rule. So if you glue two surfaces by identifying one of the circle, like on my picture, I have two surfaces here, sigma 1 and sigma 2. I glue this circle C3 of sigma 1 with the circle C3 of sigma 2. I get this glued pair of points with 4 boundary now. The amplitude I get should be like this. So now it's an amplitude of it's a function of 4 boundary field. So it's one distribution on the circle, one distribution on the circle, one distribution on the circle, one here. It should be the integral over the space of field on this circle where I glue of the amplitude of sigma 1, phi 2, phi 3, phi 1, phi 2, phi 3, integrated again the amplitude of sigma 2g, phi 3, phi 4, phi 5, and I integrate out the phi 3. So you see, it's like a composition of operator. When you compose matrices, you sum over the middle term, and if you integrate two integral kernel, you get this rule. So it's very natural, and it's a functorial thing actually. Each surface, when you glue, you should get a composition of operator. That's very simple. And very geometric. It's a very nice axiomatic representation of quantum field theory. Remember in Vincent's talk, we were computing the 4-point function by disintegrating along the middle circle, and we got a scalar product in a Hilbert space. And then we tried to decompose using a certain basis of this Hilbert space. This is what we are going to do for surfaces now. So for this, I need a Hilbert space. And the Hilbert space of Liouville theory is going to be the one that Vincent introduced. I take the real line, which is the constant term. So remember, a field on the circle, you expand it in Fourier series. So the zero component, so the average of the field, is going to be called C, and phi n are going to be distributed with a Gaussian law of mean 0 and variance 1. So this is this Hilbert space. So it's L2 of the real line time this set of sequences with this infinite product of Gaussian measure. And you can identify it to L2 of the negative Sorbet space H minus epsilon, or I put S is epsilon, with this measure. By just pushing forward your canonical measure, so the Lebesgue time the infinite Gaussian, by this random field. And here phi n I denote it by xn plus iyn divided by square root of n. And I want it to be a real field. So this is for the positive n, but for the negative n, of course, it's just the bar of this. So it means you put a minus. If now you have a B disjoint circle, you're going to take L2 of the product of this space and the product measure. Basically, it means you take B independent field, phi 1, phi 2, phi B, one for each, if you think at least as a disjoint union of circle as a boundary of a Riemann surface, you pick one field for each boundary, and you distribute it with the same law. So it's really independent family. This is the Hilbert space. Now we need to construct the amplitude. I told you in Segal we should associate to each Riemann surface an amplitude, which is a function, an L2 function over this space. And here I put h minus s of S1 mu, but you can also view it as this thing is the same as R time your probability space, okay? By just using that the field are written in Fourier series like this, and I take phi n as the component. So the definition of the amplitude is quite similar to the way we define the correlation function or the partition function. Physically, it should be like this. It should be the path integral with the Liouville action, and here you have the correlation. But you put a conditioning on the boundary. So you fix, if you have a B boundary, you fix a B random field on your boundary. You take the path integral and you condition the value of the field on each of the boundary circle to be this phi. So phi this blue phi is just this big independent random field, one for each circle, like I wrote here, phi 1, phi 2, phi 3. Each one has a Fourier expansion. And you need a mathematical definition, of course. And in fact, we define a rigorous probabilistic definition by saying, by definition, the amplitude, it's a function over this phi 1, phi 2, phi b, which are these things, which you can identify with this Fourier series, by saying that it's an expectation with respect to this x of d. So x of d is going to be a Gaussian free field with Dirichlet condition on your surface. So you use the Green function with Dirichlet condition, plus the harmonic extension of this collection of field on the boundary. So you fix phi 1, phi 2, phi 3. You solve the equation delta G P phi 1, phi 2, phi 3 equals 0 with the condition that P of phi restricted to the boundaries set as Ci is phi I. That's the harmonic extension. And this is exactly what that Vincent explained here. The Gaussian free field you can disintegrate into a Dirichlet free field on the top half sphere, Dirichlet free field here, and the rest is just the harmonic extension of the restriction of the free field on the circle. So here we do the same essentially. We decompose the Gaussian free field in terms of this decomposition with conditioning. We take the expectation with respect to this Dirichlet field, and the rest is the same as before, except that we have to add a certain term, which I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's a sort of half density term, which you can express in terms of a Dirichlet-Neumann operator. And this term comes from the fact that here it should be a Lebesgue measure, this d phi in some sense. And here we're working with a Gaussian measure. And this thing somehow takes care of this, that in the formal, when you do this formal Segal axiom, you see here you're using a sort of Lebesgue measure, while here in our work we work with Gaussian measure, and because of this we need to put this correction term, which is involved this Dirichlet-Neumann operator. But you can forget this if you don't like Dirichlet-Neumann operator. The message is just that there is a probabilistic expression for this amplitude. And it's just this formal integral with conditioning. Now, what is the theorem? Theorem that we proved in this paper we posted recently is that the Segal axiom for the Liouville theory are satisfied under this Seiberg condition, that the sum of the weight in the correlation plus Q times the Euler characteristic are positive. Each amplitude is actually living in L2 of the negative Sobolev space 2 power b with respect to this measure. So it's an element in the tensor product of this Hilbert space. They satisfy the conformal invariance. You know, when you rescale the background metric by a function, you just get this simple anomaly. And they satisfy the gluing properties required by Segal axiom. Basically, what this theorem says is exactly what I wrote here, this formal computation that physicists do. It's a rigorous proof of this formal disintegration of the path integral. Okay, so now let me come to the propagator. I told you when we have a quantum field theory, for instance, if we view the cylinder as a space-time, there should be an evolution. And in our case, because we work more in a Riemannian setting, it should be a Markov process, like a diffusion or a heat operator. So here, Vincent explained you that there is a certain Feynman-Kac representation of a propagator for the sphere, for the disk. He was saying that you take the Gaussian free field, you restrict, you contract your circle using a dilation. So this is the circle of radius exponential minus t for t positive. He said you restrict the Gaussian free field here, and you obtain a sort of propagation, and you get a Markov process which involves the Brownian motion. In fact, what we can show is that if you take the annulus A of t of, so this annulus here between the circle of radius 1 and the circle of radius exponential minus t. So this is this annulus. This annulus, of course, imagine you can view it as well as a cylinder. Okay. The message is that this radial variable, which is exponential minus t, is like the time somehow, the time variable in this picture. And here the theta variable is just the circle variable. So the space variable should be here, and so in some sense the time variable should be here. So we view the circle and the annulus as a sort of time evolution. And because we work with probability, it's not going to be a Schrödinger propagator, but it's going to be a Markov process. And what we can show is that this Markov process is related to the amplitude of this annulus. So you take this annulus, you take its amplitude, so it's a function of two fields, phi and phi prime. So one is for the exterior circle, one is for the interior circle. So phi again is the sum of phi n exponential I n theta. Phi prime is the sum of phi prime n exponential I n theta. So you get a random field distributed with a Gaussian law. Each phi n is a Gaussian law. This amplitude is a function of these two fields. It's an expectation again. It involves this Dirichlet-Neumann operator that you can forget if you don't like. And so we have an amplitude now. It's an L2 function of phi and phi prime. Actually, not really quite L2, but let's forget this. And then you view it as an integral kernel. So it's a bit like the heat kernel somehow. The heat kernel would be a function of x and x prime. Here, it's a function of a phi and phi prime, a field on the two boundary. And then you define an operator. If you take a function f on the Hilbert space, which is L2 of h minus s with the Gaussian measure, you integrate f in the left variable against this integral kernel, which think of it as if it was the heat kernel. And this defines an operator on h. And the result is that if you do this, you exactly get the Markov process that Vincent explained. And what is in fact, it's a very geometric idea. If you assume we have proved the Segal axiom, which actually we did, okay? Take an annulus. Take the annulus between 1 and exponential minus t1, the gray annulus. Now you glue another annulus, the blue one, between exponential minus t1 and exponential minus t2. When you glue them, you get a bigger annulus, okay? So what it says is that if you glue two annulus, you still get an annulus. So by Segal axiom, it means that if you take the amplitude of one and you compose with the amplitude of the other one, it should be the amplitude of the bigger annulus. It means that this is why you create a semigroup, because the annulus undergluing becomes really a semigroup. And because of the conformal invariance, the blue annulus, it's the same as a similar annulus to the gray annulus by just scaling. And the conformal invariance tells you that the amplitude are going to be the same. So this is why somehow the amplitude of the annulus should be a propagator, should be a contraction semigroup. And now another idea is that if you take a disk D, this blue disk, and with a marked point at 0 and a weight alpha, you can also define an amplitude associated to this by the same definition as before, by this definition, this expectation. But you take the disk now with a marked point. Geometrically, if you glue a disk to an annulus, you get a bigger disk. So what it says that if you apply the amplitude of the disk, which is a function of the field on the circle, and you compose with the annulus, you get a bigger disk. So again, you get the amplitude of a bigger disk, which means you have created an eigenfunction. Okay? It means that S of t, this propagator, if you apply it to the amplitude of the disk, you get the amplitude of the disk with a scaling. So it means you have found an eigenfunction of your propagator. And that's the main idea behind this bootstrap thing, that somehow the amplitude of the disk is going to diagonalize this propagator. They are going to be the eigenfunction of the propagator. And this is how we will obtain the bootstrap result in the end. So now the proposition that we have is that if we take this S of t, as I said, S of t was defined using, it's the operator whose integral kernel is given by this amplitude of the annulus. You will multiply by a certain factor of a power of t, which is completely deterministic. It's going to be this exponential minus th that Vincent explained you in terms of Brownian motion. It's a Markov process. It's a contraction semigroup on this Hilbert space, which is also L2 of h minus s of the circle with this Lebesgue time Gaussian measure. And it has a self-adjoint generator. This is the one that Vincent explained. There is a Laplacian on the zero component of the field, on the real line. Well, q square is just a constant. Then you have two harmonic oscillator, and this is the formula for this harmonic oscillator. So it's a sum of these are harmonic oscillator, and one for each phi n, basically. Phi n, remember, was xn plus iyn. So it said that on each of these phi n, you have a harmonic oscillator. And then you have an interaction term, which is this potential, exponential gamma c times v. And v is just the mass of the Gaussian multiplicative KO on the circle. This is a potential which is positive, and in some LP space, on this probability space omega, which is all the set of xn and yn, with the Gaussian measure. But it's only true if gamma is less than square root of 2. If gamma is more than square root of 2, this potential becomes very singular. It becomes more like a measure. So now you can imagine you have to diagonalize this operator. You work with a Schrödinger operator in infinite dimension. The potential is very rough. So it's a bit annoying. I mean, we are not used to do this in analysis. So one had to develop some tools for this and actually combine with the probabilistic estimate given by Feynman-Kac integral to try to obtain a diagonalization of this operator. But the idea is that for diagonalize it, we are going to use the amplitude of the disk, as I said. Okay, so let me explain a little bit how to obtain a Plancherel formula for our Hilbert space. So a decomposition of the scalar product of the Hilbert space in terms of eigenfunction. I want to start with the case where I don't have the Gaussian multiplicative KO. It's just the free field. It means take this V to be 0. Oops, sorry. In fact, it's not so complicated in this case because you have a Laplacian on the line. We know how to diagonalize the Laplacian on the line. It's just the Fourier transform. Okay, the Laplacian on the line is diagonalized by just the exponential IPC. It's called the plane wave. Just the Fourier transform, very easy. And now the P is an infinite dimensional harmonic oscillator. we know how to diagonalize an harmonic oscillator. It's just the Hermite function. So we do the same. It's going to be diagonalized by a product of harmonic oscillator and finitely many. So you take all possible product of finitely many harmonic oscillator and you obtain an eigenfunction. And you can prove it's a full basis of your space. So it means that all the eigenfunctions are going to be exponential IPC time a product of harmonic oscillator in Xn. Okay, so you get Ornstein-Uhlenbeck operator, Laplacian on the line. You just have infinitely many, but if you take a finite product of them, in the end you obtain what you want. And here it's easy to get a Plancherel formula. It's just the Fourier transform and the fact that these are a basis of L2 of your probabilistic space. And this is the Plancherel formula. And what is important is that as a function of P, this exponential IPC admits an analytic continuation to the whole complex plane of P, just because it's exponential. And this is what will make the bridge between probability and analysis somehow, this continuation in P. So our theorem is the following. If we take now the Liouville Hamiltonian, which is this was this previous one plus a potential term, we can show that there exists a complete family of eigenstates denoted by this phi qi plus ip kl. So kl again are these finite sequence of integer, and the eigenfunctions are given by this. And this family is actually diagonalizing the L2 of R of C time omega. So we get a Plancherel formula, just like the usual Plancherel formula. And more importantly, the eigenfunctions are actually generated by the amplitude of the disk. So this is the theorem here. If you take the probabilistic amplitude of the unit disk with one mark point at x equals 0 and weight alpha less than q, you define phi alpha of phi to be the amplitude of the disk with mark point 0, with insertion 0 and weight alpha. It's this probabilistic expression. It's not quite in L2. It's going to be in L2, but with a weight in terms of C, this alpha minus q C. So it's in a bigger space than L2. But still, it's an eigenfunction of the Hamiltonian, which is not surprising from the Segal axiom, because as I said, you take the annulus, you glue a disk, you get a bigger disk. So it means it should be an eigenfunction, the amplitude of the disk. And this is what we prove. It's an eigenfunction, but it's not an L2 eigenfunction. So it really looks like if you would take this thing, which is not quite L2, but almost L2, and now you take alpha here. So exponential alpha C on R, it's growing exponentially either in plus infinity or in minus infinity. So it's not in L2. But still, we have one eigenfunction. And what we can show is that this eigenfunction extends in alpha. So here, alpha is real because, of course, to define it, you need the probabilistic expression. Alpha is a real number. And what we show using analysis is that as a function of alpha, we can actually get an analytic extension of this expectation. But in this analytic expansion, it was defined here on the negative real line between, up to q. We have a probabilistic representation in the yellow region, and we show using analysis that we can extend it up to this line q plus AR. So it means that this expression can be analytically extended to a whole half plane. And what is going to diagonalize the operator is the value of this amplitude of the disk on this blue line. You see, it's exactly like this exponential IPC. The Fourier transform is diagonalizing the Laplacian. The Fourier transform is really using exponential IPC. But somehow, this thing is not quite a probabilistic term. So what we show is that we start from the probabilistic term, where it's like exponential IPC is replaced by exponential alpha C, and we analytically extend it. And there is a way to obtain this psi alpha, this eigenfunction, also using what we call scattering. So we evolve the eigenfunction of the free field for a very long time, and we weight it, and the limit converge. Okay, this I want to maybe don't spend time on it. There is another basis of eigenfunction, which is just a change of basis, which is more related to Virasoro algebra and involve Young diagrams. But this is the same. And the Plancherel formula is similar, except that there are gram matrices associated to this change of basis. It's just you change the diagonalization of the harmonic oscillator. You can actually change it in a way that is more associated to the Virasoro algebra. So it's just a change of basis, basically. And this is the main theorem that we prove. We give an expression for all the correlation on all surfaces. So take a surface with n mark point. You will put insertion you want to compute the correlation at all these points. The expectation value, so the correlation function, which is, as Vincent explained, it's an expectation of a Gaussian multiplicative chaos on this surface, is going to have an explicit expression. So it's going to be an integral over R plus of this dimension, which is the dimension of the moduli space of this Riemann surface with mark point, with n mark point and genus H. H is the genus of the surface, of two terms. One is, I call it rho of P alpha, and this is going to be a product of 3-point correlation function. So this is this DOZZ factor that Vincent explained. So there are going to be many 3-point correlation function in this product. And then there is a universal term, which is called the conformal block, which is a holomorphic function of the moduli parameter of the surface. So this formula was conjectured in physics, actually. And this can be written as series over this moduli parameter. In Vincent's talk, the Q was just the Z, the first point on the sphere. So there is a way to compute this rho and this F. I mean, I don't write the formula because it's a bit combinatorial, but what I want to say is just that you can compute it. Let me explain, what are the moduli parameters? This Q. The Q parameter that we use are called plumbing parameters. So they are not like Fenchel-Nielsen coordinates. They have to be complex coordinates on moduli space. And the way you define them is you take your surface like this, so genus 3. You cut it into pair of points. Oops, it doesn't work. You cut it, and then you glue a cylinder, which is an annulus, of modulus Q. What I mean by modulus Q, I have one here. Q is a complex number in the unit disk with modulus less than 1. And I will glue an annulus between this pair of points. And when I glue, I also make, I glue the exterior circle to, for instance, this circle here. And then I glue the interior circle with a twist, which is given by the argument of Q. So you glue a circle, an annulus, and before you reglue, you twist by an angle, which is the argument of Q. And this provides you holomorphic coordinate on the moduli space of surfaces. And it's very important because the cylinder, they are related to the propagator. Remember the amplitude of the annulus, I said it's the propagator. And the propagator is diagonalized by this eigenfunction. And this is where we get this holomorphy of the surface, is because we get expression. The propagator somehow is completely explicit and is given by this annulus, which are this annulus in the middle. So this is this picture that I drew here. Take pair of points, you cut, you glue an annulus. And in terms of amplitude, it's like composing with the propagator and with another operator, which is the generator of rotation on the circle. And now I just want quickly to give you the idea on the genus 2 case. It's essentially the same as Vincent explained for the sphere. Take the genus 2 surface, cut it into 2 pair of points along 3 circles, like this. First, you use the gluing rule, the Segal axiom. Your partition function, I do it for the partition function. I don't have mark point for this example. You write it as an integral of 2 amplitude, a pairing of 2 amplitude. So it's a scalar product of 2 things. You integrate in phi 1, phi 2, phi 3, which are this random circle. So you get a scalar product like this. Second thing, you use the spectral decomposition, this Plancherel formula I wrote. So for this, I say forget the part with the Young diagrams and just take the amplitude of the disk, this phi alpha, the one which was diagonalizing. Just take this this guy in the diagonalization. Of course, in the Plancherel formula, there are this term involving K and L or the Young diagram, but let's take the first one to simplify. So if I do this, and I use my spectral decomposition, my product, I decompose using the Plancherel formula. I use analytic continuation in alpha j equal q plus ipj to come back to the probabilistic region, because phi of q plus ip, it was an analytic continuation. It's not a probabilistic expression. So I use an analytic continuation in this alpha weight. I get a function of alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, which is just the amplitude of sigma 1, this pair of points, paired with this 3 amplitude phi alpha j of disk. And now, because because alpha is real now, we use again Segal axiom and pairing with this phi alpha. As I said, phi alpha is the amplitude of the disk with one mark point. So it's like gluing 3 half disk with a mark point. And this is why you get a sphere with 3 mark points. You see? This is the important message, that somehow this product of this guy with boundary with the 3 eigenfunction is just like gluing 3 mark point, 3 disks with a mark point. And this is the Deosezi function, the 3-point function. This is this. And now we analytically continue again in alpha 1 to q plus ip. And we get the formula. One is a product of 2 Deosezi functions. And here I forgot I didn't take care of the Young diagram. If you take care of the Young diagram, it turns out using something called Ward identity that you get this blue term called the conformal block. And this is why this term comes in addition. Conformal block comes from this Young diagram term involving the Virasoro algebra. For the annulus, you get also an explicit formula for the 1 point, which was conjectured in physics. I mean, at least at the mathematical level, it was still a conjecture. And just to finish, maybe the important thing in our thing is it gives a first mathematical proof of this explicit expression proposed by physicists. This also proves the crossing symmetries, which you know, when in the bootstrap, when you decompose your surface in 2 different ways, using 2 different point decomposition, a priori, the bootstrap formula could give you 2 different values. What we prove is that they are the same. And it also implies the convergence of the conformal block, which is a series over this moduli parameter, which was not known in at least mathematically. And I think I should stop here.
Thank you. Are there questions?
So when you analytically continue in alpha, I mean, you had a certain region where you could continue. Where does this region come from?
Sorry?
How can you access which region you can
this is the analytic. This is the analytic part. Somehow, the main thing, if you look at the probabilistic expression, it's just this. It looks almost impossible to extend to q plus ip because you have powers of chaos and things like this. So what one can prove using probability is that you can extend in alpha a little bit. Alpha was real in the beginning. You can extend in a little bit in this yellow region, in a kind of cone somehow. What we use is this scattering theory. So what we use is that actually we know that phi alpha phi alpha, where is this? Phi alpha, we know it's an eigenfunction of the Hamiltonian. And then we use the fact that it's an eigenfunction and we work with the Hamiltonian, and somehow it uses some freedom theory that, you know, when you have an eigenfunction of a certain operator depending on in an analytic way in a certain region, of course it's a lot of work. I mean, it's like 40-page pretty
Can you
hardcore.
determine really the region?
Sorry?
Can you really determine the region of analytic continuation? Or you just say, at least there we know that it's going to be continued and there's no singularities?
Yeah, using analysis, you can prove, you can go up to this vertical line and a little bit further actually.
But for example, you have this kind of arc of circle
in
your drawing.
You mean this circle here?
Yes.
No, this circle is for the descendant state. When you take k and L 0, it's analytic also here. It's just for when you take k and l bigger than 0, the region that I can prove using the analytic method, I cannot go here, for instance.
Mhm. But ideally, I mean, that means that it should have a singularity at maybe on the real axis in this region, but nowhere else. That's what you
No,
expect?
it's just because, okay, we can prove this region using analysis. And now, once we know it has this extension, we actually have other method using the reflection coefficient, which, if you want, okay, to prove this, I take a Hamiltonian, like this one, and I put a general V of this form, actually. I don't really use the Liouville Hamiltonian. I just use all the properties the Liouville Hamiltonian has, and then I prove it using analysis. But then I cannot get a better result than this using this. But now, once we know this, we use also probability and the fact that it's an integrable theory. We have reflection coefficient that are explicit. And in fact, one can prove by other means that we can extend here and we can analyze all the points where this phi alpha should have pole.
Okay. So you know where exactly
Yes,
where
yes.
it should have.
Now we know, I mean, but it's a work which is not finished, but
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Timothy. It's important to talk in the microphone.
Yeah, so thanks. So here's maybe, well, a bit of a weird question, but can you consider, let's say, the gamma to 0 limit and get a, very convoluted way of computing Wald-Peterson volumes using this machinery?
Volume, I don't know, but gamma go to 0 is, I think it's the semi-classical limit, no? Semi-classical limit, you can recover things related to the classical theory of Teichmüller. That's true. I think Vincent, Rémi, and maybe Hubert have a result about this. Hubert Lacroix. But yeah, in some sense, it's a good question. You could for certain things you can recover things related to Teichmüller theory by looking at this limit gamma to go to 0. That's true. But the volume, I don't know, because here we don't really integrate on moduli space, at least in this work. We have another older paper where we did this integral over moduli space. And maybe, yeah, we didn't.
Okay, but you have marked points, right? For
yeah, it could be
the vertex
actually,
operator.
it's an interesting question. It could be interesting to look at this.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, so no more questions. So let's thank Colin again.